So good morning, everybody. And I would like to give you a very warm welcome to this webinar run by the Green Deal Project Support Office called Clearing the Air, Research Findings on New Additions to the EU Air Quality Directive Proposal. And we have a number of brilliant projects and brilliant speakers here today, so we're really looking forward to being able to share this with you. Matteo, the next slide, please. In the meantime, maybe I can give a brief introduction to what the Green Deal Project Support Office is. And what we are is an initiative established by the DG for Research and Innovation in the EU, which aims to kind of support and really maximize the impact of research projects funded through the European Commission. And this really leads to coordination and the development of cooperation activities between projects. And so this is really a good example of the type of work we do, bringing together both Green Deal core projects on topics of a similar nature, and also there's a number of non-Green Deal core projects which are with us today. And so we're really aiming to kind of share knowledge on a similar topic and maximize the impacts of these projects. So next slide, please, again. And just some meeting etiquette. So you'll notice that this meeting is being recorded. Therefore, we'd like to request that you keep your microphone muted and your camera turned off for the duration of the webinar, unless you're, of course, speaking and presenting. And if you have any questions that you would like to ask speakers as they are presenting, then please feel free to use the chat function to do so. We request that you actually mention who you're asking the question to, if it is directed to one of the speakers, or if it's a general question, then there's no need. But yes, please feel free to use the chat function, and I hope my colleagues will help me in identifying some questions for a question and answer session that we'll be having at the end of this webinar. Just a note, so my name is Eliason, and I'm facilitator and moderating this webinar. So I will be also the timekeeper for this exercise. So please don't be offended if I jump in during your presentation and just provide a helping hand to make sure that we get through all of the interesting talks that we've had prepared today. And yes, just also to note that we will have questions at the end, so please don't open up your microphone until the dedicated session when we can open up that floor. And finally, next slide, please. I just want to run through the agenda for today. So this kind of comes to the end of my short introductory slot, and we are now going to be hearing from kind of the policymakers in this area. And so we have a speaker from the DG Environment, from the European side, speaking about the Ambient Air Quality Directive. And we also have a representative from the World Health Organization, who will be talking to us about the kind of broader international context of guidelines in the air quality space. So that will last until around about 11 o'clock Central European time, and then we will be hearing from the projects. And this is kind of split into two main sections. The first section is on kind of trends in source contributions, methods to model and take inventory of these new pollutants, covered in the Ambient Air Quality Directive. And then the second section kind of focuses more on the impact on citizens and what they can do in terms of measuring air quality as well. So that will run until about 12:15, and then we'll have 15 minutes for questions and wrap up. So yes, looking to be a nice action-packed agenda for today. And so now I'd like to hand over to Lucia, who is a member of the DG Environment. And yes, I'm handing over to you to talk about the directive. Thank you. Is Lucia on the line?
Hi, Ed. Sorry, we've had some confusion. We have other people using a different link for the meeting.
Okay.
So I just shared the link in the other call, and they should be joining us in just a minute or two. So apologies for the confusion.
Okay, yeah. No worries. We'll just wait a moment then until some others have transferred across, and then we'll get started.
I see some of the participants from the other link have joined us here, so apologies again for the confusion with the links. But Lucia, have you made it onto this call?
I'm here.
Okay, perfect.
I'm here.
Great, thank you. We've just run through a brief introduction, so yeah, handing over to you, Lucia, to talk about the Ambient Air Quality Directive. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. I'm Lucia Bernal. I worked in DG Environment in the Cleaner Unit on the implementation of the Ambient Air Quality Directive and as well on the proposal. So I will give you a short presentation on the proposal and the main items covering the additional pollutants. Next slide, please. But before I come into the proposal, let me start by explaining what are the EU level cleaner policies. In fact, air pollution has been understood to be a key environmental challenge for several decades now. And early EU level policy interventions date back to the 80s and expanded in the 90s and the 2000s. These interventions comprise three pillars. We have first the Ambient Air Quality Directives that establish the air quality monitoring system and set EU air quality standards that should not be exceeded for 12 pollutants. They have also established that action should be taken in the form of air quality plans if the standards are not met. Then we have the National Emission Reduction Commitments Directive, by which member states have agreed to limit their respective national total emissions for 5 pollutants. And third, we also have source-specific emission standards that establish upper limits for key pollution sources in the transport, industry, and energy sectors via the Industrial Emissions Directive, the Euro standards for vehicles, or the eco-design. And in combination, these pillars have delivered considerable success over the past decades. As we will see in the next slides, we believe that the efforts of implementation of these three pillars are paying off. Since 2005, we have reduced the emissions of air pollutants across the EU by between 80%, for example, for sulfur dioxide, and 25% for particles, 12% for ammonia. And this has delivered a significant reduction of the associated adverse health impacts. As you see in the chart below, the number of premature deaths attributable to PM2.5 has dropped by more than 45%. And we are close to reaching the 55% reduction goal that we have set for the year 2030 under the Zero Pollution Action Plan. So we can be conclusive and say that EU cleaner policy works. However, next slide, please. There is still a problem with air pollution. And even if the number of premature deaths have decreased, as we have seen, the estimates still point to more than 230,000 premature deaths attributable to PM2.5 alone. And this is just one side of the cone, as air pollution, as you know, also causes morbidity effects such as respiratory diseases, cardiovascular diseases, or asthma. But you will hear more about this from Roman after my presentation. So we compare the exposure of air pollutant to the current EU air quality standards, and we see that the values are quite low. However, if we compare this, next slide please, to the WHO 2021 guideline levels, exposure increases significantly. So we do have a problem. Next slide, please. And this is why we decided that the EU needed to move, and the European Commission, as part of the European Green Deal in 2019, committed to learn from the experiences made when implementing the current air quality legislation. In this regard, under the Green Deal, the Commission announced that it would propose to revise the current EU air quality standards to align them more closely with the recommendations of the WHO. And it announced to propose also to strengthen the provisions on monitoring, modeling, and air quality plans to help local authorities. Regarding the monitoring, as you know, we proposed to increase the number of pollutants and look closer to additional pollutants that were not regulated. So next slide, please. More or less a year ago, on the 26th of October 2022, the European Commission put forward a proposal for a revised Ambient Air Quality Directive. This proposal was underpinned by better regulation principles and by an extensive impact assessment. We also included a vast public consultation with close to 1,000 written replies and had several rounds of also expert consultations to which maybe you contributed. And we also held 2 stakeholder meetings. Now, going into our proposal, what does it improve? In the proposal, we cover 4 key areas. The first one is environment and health. Here we set a zero pollution objective to be met by 2050 at the latest, sorry. And to set us on this path, we proposed new values for the air quality standards to be met by 2030, which would bring us more closely with the WHO recommendations. We also proposed an update of air quality metrics, for example, on the average exposure reduction obligation to be met at regional level. And we refer to a regular review mechanism to adapt the directive to more recent findings. So this regular review would take, as per our proposal, would start first in 2028 and would be done every 5 years. Under governance and enforcement, we strengthen the air quality plans to make them more effective to stop and prevent exceedance of EU standards. And we also proposed improved enforceability as we included new provisions on access to justice, compensation, and sanctions. And we expanded on the cross-border cooperation on air quality. Now, regarding monitoring and evaluation, the proposal includes a revised and further improved approach to air quality monitoring and increased use of air quality models. We also include additional information that has to be gathered regarding the representativeness of sampling points so that measures implemented are better planned and more efficient. And for the first time, as mentioned before, we proposed monitoring of additional pollutants such as ultrafine particles, black carbon, and ammonia. And I will come to more details on that after these slides. But just to finish on the 4 main areas of the proposal, we also strengthen the information and communication, as we want to increase the availability of up-to-date information on air quality for those pollutants where it's possible, including requirements for air quality indices to provide hourly reporting of available air quality data. And we also strengthen the information that has to be delivered to the public regarding their health impacts, because only by informing the public can we actually improve also the implementation of measures. So next slide, please. What do we expect from this Commission proposal? We expect benefits to significantly outweigh the cost. We expect health benefits as we calculate a reduction in premature deaths by more than 50% with our proposal. We also expect social benefits as stricter limits protect people and especially those at particular risk. We expect environmental benefits, including a decline in eutrophication and acidification of ecosystem. And we expect economic benefits, as according to our calculations, the benefits far outweigh the cost. The annual gross benefits in 2030 are estimated to 42 billion compared to measures costing 6 billion per year. Next slide, please. So now going closer into the aspects of monitoring and assessment. Here I list the articles that are covering these topics. Article 7 is simplifying the assessment thresholds, which are also defined in Annex 2 of our proposal. And Article 8 ensures that ambient air quality is monitored using fixed sampling points when the levels are above the assessment thresholds, but we also included new requirements for modeling to make use of the advances in modeling applications. So our proposal is making modeling mandatory when the limit values are exceeded and when the assessment thresholds are exceeded. This can be in combination with fixed measurements or with indicative measurements. And under the assessment threshold, we also allow for the use of objective estimation. In Article 9, we update and clarify the rules for the number and location of sampling points, including stricter rules for the relocation. This has been one of the main changes in comparison with the current directive, where we set more safeguards to the relocation of sampling points, and also do not allow this relocation to happen if exceedances are recorded for not only PM, as it's the case now, but also for NO2. This article is also governed by Annex 3, 4, and 6. So Annex 3 is the number of sampling points, more definition there. Annex 4 is the macro scale and the micro scale criteria for setting the sampling points. And Annex 7 is the reference methods. Article 10 is the new article that introduces monitoring supersites and regulates the number and location. I will come back to it later. And is also governed by the annex on macro scale criteria. And Article 11 introduces the reference methods and clarifies the data quality objectives, which are defined in Annex 5 and in Annex 6. So next slide, please. In Article 4, let me just mention, because this has the definitions. So we have also included new definitions on some of these additional pollutants. So we added a definition of UFPs that you can read on the screen, and taken from the WHO guidelines. We also included a definition from black carbon, and are on the process during the negotiations of including also definition for oxidative potential of particulate matter, which is one of the definitions that has been requested to be considered as well. Next slide, please. So together with the rest of the articles and Article 4 on the definitions, in Article 10, as mentioned, we introduced the monitoring supersites. These monitoring supersites combine multiple sampling points to gather long-term data on air pollutants covered by this directive. So for the moment, the idea is to strengthen the scientific knowledge on these pollutants. We have not included air quality standards for such, but as mentioned, as we have included the possibility to review the directive every 5 years, all the scientific knowledge that would be gathered from these monitoring supersites would feed into, possibly in the future, the need to set also air quality standards in the form of limit values or target values, or we will see in the future how this is done. The idea is also to combine these monitoring supersites with other also already regulated pollutants. So the Article 10 requires member states to put in place 1 monitoring supersite per 10 million inhabitants for urban background location, and if fewer than 10 million, at least 1. And for rural background locations, 1 monitoring supersite per 100 square kilometers, and if lower, then at least 1. Member states can also set up in agreement 1 or more stations with their neighboring member states, and the minimum, let's say minimum or definite measurement that has to be done is in urban background to measure ultrafine particles and oxidative potential, and in urban and rural backgrounds to measure all the pollutants that I list there, which I will not start mentioning, but you can always find all the further details in the proposal itself. As you may know, well, no, I will come back to that in my last slide. So next slide, please. In addition to the work done in the proposal itself, let me also inform you that we are also looking into work that is not legislative per se, but it's on not legislative items, so on delivering guidances to support the further implementation of the directive. And this work has already started. The list that you see here comes from the results of a support study that we had also during the revision process, and also from the consultations that were undertaken. The conclusions was that these 7 guidances were needed, and where we have started is on producing a guidance on the reference method and data quality objectives for the, let's say, old and new pollutants, so for the regulated and for the additional pollutants included, such as UFPs or oxidative potential. This will also be included in this guidance, and we are also producing guidance on the use of models as the proposal strengthens their use. So on my last slide, I wanted to, next slide, please. I wanted to show you all the timeline and where we are. We are almost at the end of the process that initiated on the first quarter of 2020 with the fitness check and the impact assessment that continue further, all this public consultation that I have mentioned. As mentioned in last year in October 2022, the legislative proposal was adopted. That was then preceded, followed by work at the Parliament and work at the Council. We have been very busy having dialogues with them so that they could reach their position, which was finalized first by the Parliament in September of this year, and followed by the Council in October of this or early November. Sorry, early November. It's been it seems like a long time has passed, but it was very recent ago. And since both of those institutions have their position, we are the trialogue. Let's say the dialogue between the 3 institutions has started, and this is where we are at the moment. So we are discussing all the articles with them, and unfortunately, I actually wanted to stay for the whole webinar today to also learn from the research projects that have a wealth of information that can feed into the proposal, and also further on the implementation of the directive. But unfortunately, one of these trialogues is happening at the moment, and I will have to leave after my presentation. So I just wanted to conclude by next slide, please, by thanking you. I hope it was clear, and I look forward to receiving the presentations and possibly a report from the organizers of this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lucia. That was really clearly explained, and it was brilliant, I think, for all those that are slightly less familiar with the proposal to get up to speed. So really appreciate that, and yes, we'll be sharing the materials with you afterwards. So yes, as you already introduced, I'd like to pass over to Ramon, who will be speaking from the World Health Organization's perspective. So over to you to introduce yourself, and if possible, if you could speak for around about 10 minutes or just over, that would be brilliant. Yeah, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present on the good practice statements and the WHO Global Air Quality Guidelines, which are very much related to the new air pollutants included in the proposal for the new Air Quality Directive. My name is Roman Perez, and I work as a technical officer at the WHO European Center for Environment and Health, who has been the lead of the development of the new Air Quality Guidelines. Next slide, please. So the new Air Quality Guidelines, as many of you already know, were launched in September 2021. It's about 2 years now, but they are part of a long list of air quality guidelines for both for ambient air pollution and also for indoor air pollution that our center in Bonn has led over the years, since the late 80s in particular. All these guidelines have covered along the years different pollutants, and also the methods used for developing the guidelines have evolved, but over the time they have been providing the best and robust public health recommendations based on a comprehensive assessment of the evidence. Next slide, please. I just wanted to give a snapshot of the many reasons that led to the update of these new guidelines. Over the last 15 years, there was quantum increase in evidence, in data, and information related to air pollution, and in particular related to health evidence, evidence on the health effects from exposure to air pollution. Both the quantity and the quality of this evidence increased in the last decade and a half. There were some more data on concentrations, on emissions, on the global burden of disease, also on health inequities related to differential exposure to air pollution. We also knew that the previous air quality guidelines from 2005 have been adopted in many jurisdictions across the world, and also air pollution and its mitigation has become more central in WHO and UN activities. Next slide. So we set out to update the guidelines in 2016, and for that we gather the best experts in the world in this matter. A guideline development group in charge of developing the recommendations, a systematic review team, and also an external review group and methodologies to help us in this endeavor. And as a result of the guideline development process, we came with recommendations in the form of air quality guideline levels for 6 pollutants, as you can see in the table on the slide, for PM2.5, PM10, ozone, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and carbon monoxide for both short and term exposures in relation to critical health outcomes, mortality mainly, but also for short-term exposures, things like admissions related to asthma and myocardial infarction, etc. Although the air quality guideline levels were the core objective of this process, developing these recommendations, we also provided in the process interim targets and good practice statements. These are policy levers that help to achieve their quality guidelines and improve the health of the population overall. Next slide. So the interim targets, these were retained from the previous 2005 air quality guidelines, and they provide incremental steps towards achieving the air quality guidelines, and they aim to promote continuous improvement of air quality. These have proven very useful in many countries, and because of this utility, the guideline development group decided to keep them and also add a few more interim targets. Next slide. The other policy lever that is new in this edition of the air quality guidelines is the good practice statements. These are qualitative statements to aid in the management of certain types of particulate matter, namely sun and dust storms, black and elemental carbon, and ultrafine particles. Next slide. The reasons why the guideline development group decided to develop these good practice statements was because there were indications of health risks in the available literature at the beginning of the guideline development process for these types of particulate matter. However, there was a decision to follow up ongoing systematic reviews at that time to see if it was possible to establish some quantitative air quality guideline levels, like for the, let's call them classical air pollutants. But however, at the end of the process, the new evidence synthesis didn't allow to develop these quantitative guidelines. So the decision was to provide advice to promote monitoring mitigation actions, and most importantly, further assessment and research on these types of particulate matter. Next slide, please. These types of particulate matter components or sources of PM, in fact, are not, it's important to say that they are not the only types of particulate matter that are important for health or on which there is indication of a potential health risk. They just were prioritized because the GDG decided that these were the areas of action that were at that time of more concern from the health perspective, or from the perspective of member states that were concerned about issues like desert and sandstorms. But it doesn't mean that other components shouldn't be monitored, or there shouldn't be more research on other components or types of particulate matter. For black and elemental carbon, the good practice statement you can see on the right side of the slide, it was, as I mentioned before, about measurements and monitoring. It was about more assessments, exposure assessments, source apportionment, also producing emission inventories, and about taking mitigation actions, including developing standards or targets where appropriate. And the evidence at that time, there was toxicological evidence, there were epidemiological studies indicating a consistent association with some morbidity and mortality outcomes, especially cardiovascular and respiratory. However, the evidence was not enough to say whether this relationship was independent, or rather black carbon or elemental carbon were indicators of PM 2.5 mass. That means whether they were correlated and not dependent from PM 2.5 mass. Next slide, please. For ultrafine particles, the good practice statements, they were also about using emerging science and technology for exposure assessment. This is related to more research and assessments, also about conducting better and more air quality monitoring and measurements. But in particular here, the Guideline Development Group wanted to give some definitions about particle number concentrations, and distinguish what was low and high particle number concentration. This has been taken up by the European Commission in their proposal. And the evidence, similar to black carbon, many studies, however here, toxicological evidence as well. However here, the problem was that the epidemiological studies had measured different things, because the definitions of ultrafine particles were not well harmonized. It was difficult to synthesize all the epidemiological studies together, and this was the main issue that didn't allow to develop quantitative air quality guidelines. Next slide, please.
If it's possible to wrap up in a couple of minutes, that would be really great. Just give you a heads up. Yeah, thank you.
For good practice statements on sun and dust terms, it was about improving monitoring, air quality management in general, also conducting more research, some mitigation actions that were important here, like cleaning the streets or erosion control. The evidence, again, mixed, inconsistent when accounting for sources of PM in different geographical areas, and most importantly, a lack of epidemiological studies on long-term exposure to sun and dust storms. Next slide, please. Apart from the guidelines, there are other reports that were published before and after the guidelines that talk about some PM components. We are going to launch, hopefully this year, a report on some metals and benzene that might be useful also to support the new Air Quality Directives. New slide, please. Just to highlight that the good practice statement have been referred to in the position paper of the Parliament and the proposal of the Commission as well, as Lucia presented already. Last slide, please. I would like to end my presentation by thanking all the experts that were involved in the development of the guidelines. You can see here their names. The last slide is to thank the funders of the guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really excellent. I'm really appreciative of those discussions. So yeah, again, there's some links embedded in there, so we'll share the slides afterwards. People can hopefully follow those reports and see what's been written and the developments over time. So thank you again.
Thank you.
We now move to the next portion of our webinar, which is presentations from the projects. And this first section is on kind of the identification of sources and measurement and monitoring of the new pollutants covered by the proposed Air Quality Directive. So I'd like to hand over to Roy Ovens to give their presentation. And I believe Xavier wanted to share his own slides. So if you'd like to take over.
No, it's okay.
No? Okay.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you for organizing this meeting and for having given to us the opportunity to present our contribution. Next one, please. So Array Urbans is a project which with this acronym that means Research Infrastructure Services, reinforcing air quality monitoring capacities in European urban and industrial areas. So here in the right, you have the concept in which we are devising and offering some service tools on measurements, on modeling, on emission inventories, on mapping. And then we test that in around 11, now we are near 15 cities. And finally, we support the upscaling of these services, okay? We are 14 countries. We have 25 beneficiaries and 1 associated beneficiary, and now we have 15 cities. We started in October. So the proposal was written in the beginning of 2021, and these were the advanced air quality parameters that we were suggesting. As you can see, as you will see, these are exactly the ones that are introduced in the new Air Quality Directive. Next one, please. So we will provide tools. So we have prepared a document with the link to around 20 service tools that will be sent to Green Deal office, and then this document can be distributed among the people registered to this webinar, and then you will have the link of each one of these service tools. We are providing service tools for the measurements of ultrafine particles, particle number, size distribution, black carbon, PM online and offline chemistry, ammonia, volatile organic compounds, and oxidative potential, okay? And then we are discussing with Aquila. We take most of these tools from Actris and from the standardization bodies. And then we are discussing with them how to agree in the proposal of this for air quality. We also we work especially with IAGOS for 3D measurements. And at this moment, for many cities, you can have for specific days the ozone profiles over the urban cities with equipment that is transporting the airplanes. We have tools for source apportionment using receptor modeling, both for offline and online tools, urban mapping and citizen science. You will see examples given today by Martin van Poppel. And then we have the evaluation of the health effects of these advanced air quality parameters that I listed before. And finally, we provided the first emission inventory of ultrafine particles with particle number, size distribution, and non-exhaust vehicle emissions, and also the modeling tools to model this over Europe. We are compiling the existing data. For example, for ammonia, we have 62 time series. For ultrafine particles, particle size distribution, we have 16 cities with 27 series. And then we do the epidemiological analysis, and we will do pan-European reports showing the added value of measuring these parameters. So we have already published the one on ultrafine particles, on black carbon, on PM speciation, and so on. And then we are favoring the flow of the data to Actris, because after the life of our urbans, the data will flow to Actris. And then we communicate the outputs to the stakeholders, and we help to upscale these service tools. Next one, please. So these are some examples of these added values. For example, this is the map of the levels of ultrafine particles in Europe. You see that in the north, cities have between 4,000 and 5,000 particles per square centimeter. There is an intermediate Central European belt with 8,000, and the Mediterranean area and the Eastern with more than 10,000. We see that from 60 to 90% of the ultrafine particles are attributable to traffic. We see two types of ultrafine particles with traffic. There is no time. But we also show, using these 16 cities, what is the trend. And then you see from the period 2009-2019, most of the cities have a decreasing trend for ultrafine particles. And we believe this is the effect, the policy effect of the filter traps from diesel since 2011 with Euro 5. So we see that there is a decreasing trend. Only a few cities show an increasing trend. Next one, please. And now our colleagues from Work Package 2 are providing, we have already data from the health effects of these new parameters in many of these cities. Next one. Another example is the black carbon. We see here the source contribution in this large number of cities in Europe. And then you see that traffic is accounting for more than 80% of the black carbon in most cities, but some cities like Bucharest or like Granada are starting to have more than 20% of this black carbon from biomass burning, domestic biomass burning. And then if you see the diesel black carbon, you see that there is a decreasing trend in most of the cities, but the black carbon from biomass burning, it's increasing in many of these cities. So the ratio, so probably in a few years, it is possible that that at least 50% of the black carbon is arising from biomass burning. And we are also evaluating the health effects of these two types of black carbon. Next one. This is the ammonia showing in the right. For example, all these cities are hotspots for farming and agriculture hotspots, and you see that we detected an increase in ammonia, while in the cities out of the hotspots, the levels are higher in the traffic sites, and we don't detect any trend. Next one. So this is the emission inventory. You see that shipping is the main source, followed by traffic, by industry, and by aviation. But when we go inside the city, it is traffic, the main contribution to the exposure of the citizens in urban areas. As you can see, the PM 2.5 arise mostly from the domestic combustion sources and from the industry, so very different than ultrafine particles. Next one. And to end, we are able to collaborate or to work in the issues of the new Air Quality Directive. So the proof is in the base documents of the air quality that DG Environment has in their website, RI Urbans is cited as one information source to get information for Article 10 on the super sites. So RI Urbans is in fact trying to be the urban part of Actris. So Actris will continue and will collect all the data on urban areas. We presented with Actris joint recommendations for the implementation of Article 10 to DG Environment and Aquila during the discussion period. We have the 10th of January, we'll have a meeting with Aquila, Actris and EMEP to discuss, to devise together with the stakeholders these service tools. We organize periodically stakeholder meetings to inform that, and we will produce the pan-European reports for giving the added value, what you can obtain for air quality from the measurement of that. We will help to upscale these service tools that in fact is to support to implement Article 10 of the new directive. We are also evaluating the health effects, not for one city, but for large numbers of cities from different climates and urban structures in Europe. We are providing the first emission inventories for these two advanced pollutants and also the modeling tools. That's our major contributions. Thank you very much for allowing us to present this.
Thank you so much, Javier. That was really interesting. Yeah, looking forward to seeing some of those things you'll share afterwards as well. Great. Now handing over to Stargate, who are going to be talking about ultrafine particle monitoring in airports.
Okay, I'll take over. My name is Jan Peters. I work at Vito. I'm here to introduce you the Stargate project, in which air quality is, in fact, one of the topics we're dealing with. It's a smaller topic, as I will show in the next slide, but the main focus of this presentation will be on UFP monitoring and modeling at airports, so in the framework of Stargate. Next slide, please. Stargate in brief, it's a large European Green Deal project. We have 22 partners on board, and the project is led by Brussels Airport Company. Together with Brussels Airport, there are other airports involved as well, like Toulouse Airport, Budapest Airport, and Athens Airport. And the idea is to develop innovative techniques and solutions at airports to become greener and more sustainable, and try to implement those in those different airports. Not all the projects are developed at every airport. In that sense, Brussels Airport is sort of a lighthouse function where most of the projects are tested, but others are also at the other airports. So the main goals of the projects are described around three pillars. First of all, modal shift, so looking at traffic and mobility of the entire airport system. A second pillar is decarbonization, where the main focus is on the use of sustainable aviation fuels and how to get them at the airports and be able to fuel aircrafts with SAFs. A third pillar is the local environmental quality, and in this pillar, air quality is a part, but noise is also tackled here, and also the digitization, more precisely of the cargo system to reduce waiting times and so on, to try to lower emissions and improve the local air quality and noise circumstances. So in total there are more than 30 projects that are taking place. Some of them are in the starting phase, others are already a bit more advanced. The project will run up till 2026. Next slide, please. If we focus now on the work we do on UFP monitoring and modeling, I have one slide for each. So first, the monitoring part. So what we do is we have a rather simple monitoring setup, but this system allows us to benchmark the current situation regarding UFP levels at the airport and in the neighboring communities, and also to evaluate innovative technical solutions for a more sustainable integration of the airport within its surroundings. And of course, the final goal is to limit the environmental impact further of airport processes. What we measure is the total particle numbers. We tend to do that at a quite high resolution. 10-second resolution is proven to be adequate for most of the applications we use it for. We try to relate to specific movements and use of aircrafts processes on the airport. So this high resolution really is an advantage there. We also look at the particle number distributions, and there we use scans of several minutes, but so with a much lower temporal resolution, but this allows us to have more understanding of the nature of the particles. So as I said, we prepared some sort of lightweight installation for doing this. The reason is also that it's relatively easy to deploy both at landside and airside areas. Sometimes at specific areas on the airport, which are quite tricky to reach. Yes, next slide. Yeah, if we do measurement campaigns, we start off with some collocation measurements, and then we deploy the instrumentation at several sites. On the map, you can see the different sites where measurements have taken place over the last years. Next slide. So, depending on the campaign, we end up with time series of measurements to look at specific processes, or more to get an idea on concentrations in the neighborhood. And then it's key to try to understand those time series and try to relate that to actions that are taken, or to factors that are influencing the concentrations. Next slide, please. One way to complement this is by the modeling. So we developed a Gaussian dispersion model for UFP in the airport region. We used a bottom-up approach to do this. So starting from emissions of not only aircrafts, but also the traffic in the neighborhood, other auxiliary material that is servicing at the airport, and so on. And those emissions are fed into a model to be able to predict or estimate concentrations at the airport, but also in the vicinity of the airport. At Brussels, there are quite some communities pretty close by the airport, so it's very important for them as well. In doing so, for example, we make up annual maps to get a regional estimation on concentrations. Next slide. These maps are also introduced in a software tool, and this is really interesting for example, to evaluate measures. So as you can see at the right bottom side, you can select UFP or other pollutants, and then you can look at contributions of specific activities, like, for example, the landing or the runoff or the taxiing and so on. So you can extract that data from the model. And which is also interesting is that you can click on certain locations on the map, and the model will estimate the contributions by means of this pie chart at the left-hand side, where you can see for different locations what contributions you can expect from various airport operations or traffic or other sources that are included in the model. This is very handy to be able to, for example, to calculate some scenario analysis. Most of the projects at the airport take off in a pilot phase where new things are developed and they're implemented at a smaller scale. But of course, you want to have at least have an idea on the effect when it's implemented in a more broader way, and this model can help then to evaluate this better. And yeah, the next slide.
Can I ask you to summarize very briefly, Jan? Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, very briefly. In relation to the EU Air Quality Directive then, okay, for the UFP monitoring, there I wanted to highlight a point about the time resolution that in a very highly dynamic setting as the airport, we think that sub-minute measurements are really beneficial to be able to relate to certain sources. The particle size also very small, smaller than 10 nanometer particles are very present in that area, so that should be kept in mind as well. And then some point that I'm a bit struggling with is the really high concentrations and their effect on means in those areas. So we notice that sometimes the upper concentration limits of your instruments can be exceeded. Very high peaks occur, and they can have a very influential on your averages that you calculate, and this in relation to health effects is a question I want to raise here, whether we look better at means or medians or other percentile values to evaluate this. From the modeling part, in general, I think in the new directive there will be more emphasis on modeling in general and the quality of objectives, but specific for UFP, I don't think there is something included. So this concludes my talk. Thank you very much, Ed. I wanted to add that we are in close collaboration also with sister projects Tulips and Olga, which are doing more or less similar things at Paris and Amsterdam airport, and also at thanks to this initiative with URI Urbans to look more into source apportionment based on monitoring data. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan. Yeah, there's some great collaborations going on between projects, both here and not present here. So thank you for highlighting those. Handing over to NPETs now. Can I please request that projects keep their summaries quite brief from now on? We're running a little bit behind, but looking forward to hearing the rest of them. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Ed, and to the organization for the kind invitation. My name is Fulvio Amato. I work in CSIC in Barcelona, and I will present the NPETs project, which stands for nanoparticle emissions from the transport sector. Okay, the next slide, please. NPETs is a H2020 Research Innovation Action. Has a budget of more than 5 million, and it will last until next year. The coordinator is Ulf Olofsson from KTH, and the main goal is to study the phenomenology, but mostly the toxicology of ultrafine particles emitted from road traffic, aviation, ships, and train. The area of studies are 5 cities in Europe: Stockholm, Barcelona, Milan, Thessaloniki, and Valencia. Next slide, please. Okay, the approach of the NPETs project goes to study the generation of particles from the emission sources in the laboratory in bench test, but also in the real world, very close to the sources, like the hotspots for road tunnels, roads, airports, harbors, and subway platforms, but also in the real world urban backgrounds, with the final goal to study with different methodology the toxicological impact on humans and animals. Next slide, please. Here we can see a very general overview of the concentration we are observing with the 1-month measurements campaign at more than 15 sites in Europe. In light gray, you can see the urban background concentration, which are mostly below the 10,000 high exposure threshold, if we can call it like that, by WHO. Although sometimes we reach also a much higher concentration, depending on the region and the season. On the other hand, the traffic hotspots exceed mostly at all sites the threshold of 10,000 particles per cubic centimeter, with exception of subway platforms. The highest concentration were reached for the airport monitoring sites. Next slide, please. Here we can see a separation of fresh versus secondary ultrafine particles using methodology already established in literature. And we can see that the secondary fraction is dominant at all sites, both at the background site, where it's more or less was more or less expected, but also at very near to the sources, like in the airports of Barcelona and Milan, where it reaches more than 80%, but also in roads and the harbors. Next slide, please. Here we can see that the particle number size distribution for the different environments, for the different hotspots, sorry, is very similar, peaking at the lowest particle size range, which here is about starts from 6 nanometers, with some exception, like in the road tunnel. You can see in the first plot on the left, the Stockholm site is a tunnel. And also on the subway platform, we can see a distribution which much more looks like much more a plateau. Sorry, we have some noise.
Yeah.
Next slide, please. And finally, we also perform source apportionment studies. This is the example of Barcelona, where we can see both the size distribution of the single source contributed to the total ultrafine particle measure in ambient air. And for example, we can see that at the road, we identify both gasoline and diesel contribution. That the mode of the size distribution is different, peaking at around 20 nanometers for gasoline and about 80 to 90 nanometers for diesel. And the total contribution of road traffic is about more than 60%. While an important contribution is also coming from the photonucleation, which is typical of Mediterranean environment, with new particle formation from photooxidation of SO2. Which we also observe at harbor and airport, and by coincidence is very, very common contribution, around 30%. At the harbor, we identify, of course, a shipping contribution is about 36%, but maybe more interestingly for the European Air Quality Directive and the emission inventories that we identify these sites, the mode of the size distribution at 30 nanometers. Very close to what has been shown in the Urban's emission inventory. And finally, in the airport, very interestingly, we observed two different processes of emission. One is the taxiing during the departure, which is the dominant source of ultrafine particles with a mode at around 25 nanometers. And the second lower contribution from the takeoff itself, with a slightly higher size distribution and lower contribution. Next slide, please, just to conclude, to wrap up the message of NPETs regarding the ultrafine particles in ambient air. We observe very often exceedances of 10,000 particles per cubic centimeters, except at subways. The secondary fraction is dominant, reaching up to 90% of total concentration. The highest concentration were reached as a mean of 1 month measurement period at airports and also in the road tunnel, due mostly to the aircraft taxiing activity for departure. The photonucleation is a relevant process in Mediterranean environments. And then we can see here the list of modes, particle size mode for the different sources that we are studying, peaking at 30 nanometer for gasoline and also shipping emission, at 90 nanometer the diesel emission, and mostly made up of black carbon. And for the aircraft, we have 2 different modes according to the process of emission, peaking at around 25 to 30 nanometer. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, thank you, Fulvio. That was really interesting and very efficient as well. Really appreciate your presentation there. So passing over to Prep Air for their presentation. Thanks.
Good morning to everybody, and thanks to the organizer for this opportunity. I am Eleonora Cuccia from ARPA Lombardia, and with the help of a few slides, I would like to present you the activities carried out in the frame of Prepare project. We can pass to the next slide.
Yeah.
Thank you. The aim of the Life Prepare project is the implementation of the measures included in the air quality plans and in the Po Valley agreements. This project acts on multiple sectors and on multiple pollutants and want to strengthen the synergy among regions and the environmental agency on air quality issue, establishing a permanent networking structure. This project is made by 35 action, and source apportionment is the aim of action D6. ARPA Lombardia is involved in action D6 together with ARPA Emilia Romagna, ARPA Piemonte, ARPA Veneto, and ARPA Valle d'Aosta. Next slide, please. The study of PM10 chemical composition is performed through the sampling in the special station network. The special station arches among the station of the regional air quality monitoring network, and are 4 urban background sites in the city of Milano, Torino, Vicenza, and Bologna, and 1 rural background sites in Schivenolia near Mantova. PM10 was measured daily since April 2018, and the sampling is still ongoing. Daily PM10 samples are collected in the special station, are submitted to different chemical analysis in order to determine the main PM10 fraction. X-ray fluorescence allow the determination of elemental fraction. Ion chromatography allow the determination of ammonium nitrate and ammonium sulfate, and thermo-optical methods allow the determination of carbon compounds divided into organic carbon and elemental carbon. In Po Valley, the main components are ammonium sulfates and ammonium nitrate that take into account about 30% of PM10 mass, and the carbonaceous fraction that take in account another 25%. In winter, the Po Valley is characterized by very high ammonium nitrate concentration, up to 50% of PM10 mass. In the Po Valley, so secondary compound represent an important part of PM10 mass, and since it is necessary to consider it not only the secondary inorganic ions, but also the fraction of organic matter that have a secondary origin. All data collected in the special sites from since April 2018 until March 2022 was used for source apportionment. As a receptor model was used positive matrix factorization. PMF applied at the same time to all sites dataset, resolve 7 factor. Go to next slide, please. That are named winter secondary, made primarily by ammonium nitrate, biomass burning, traffic, salt, soil. Another factor called secondary background containing ammonium sulfate enriched with organic carbon, probably attributable to a large-scale background. And a last factor called anthropogenic mix. This factor includes several anthropogenic activities, probably with a local nature. On the upper part of the slide, on the left, is shown the average source apportionment for the 5 special sites. This study underlines a good uniformity for PM10 chemical composition and source contribution in the Po Valley, in particular for secondary compound. On the right side of the slide, the monthly source apportionment average over the basin is shown in percentage, and we can notice that the secondary factor in yellow and in blue represent more than 50% of PM10 mass. In particular, winter secondary, so ammonium nitrate, exhibits maximum values during winter season, in particular in January and in February. In this month, in some day, ammonium nitrate reaching up to more than 50% of PM10 mass. On the other side, traffic and biomass burning was subjected to lockdown. In particular, traffic show a decrease in March and April 2020. And instead, biomass burning show a decrease in increase in many cities during the month of lockdown. The onset of COVID-19 pandemic create an unprecedented emission situation, producing a discontinuity in the time series. This, combined with the meteorological variability, makes the 4 years analyzed too short to make statistically sense consideration about the presence of any trend in the identified factor. However, some consideration can be done comparing the described result with the 10 years of data collected in Milano. In the bottom part of the slide is shown this comparison only for, like an example, only for some sources, and the only factor that seems to show a decreasing trend for several years, net of 2020 particularities, is vehicular traffic. For the other sources, no clear behavior can be identified, and it would be necessary to have a longer time series on which to apply specific analysis to study any trend. Next slide for the conclusions. Thank you. And in this project, a common monitoring network for the PM10 chemical characterization was created, and emerged that secondary compounds are the major contributors to PM10. Their formation in Po Valley is very complex. The land geography, the meteorological condition, and the availability of precursors play an important role. And so the measurement of ammonia and secondary inorganic ion became very important. We cannot forget the importance of the investigation of secondary carbonaceous fractions, and also epidemiological studies to know what is more or less harmful, and interaction studies with climate and climate altering agents are necessary. To conclude, PM10 chemical composition allow the study of PM10 sources, and so it is necessary to continue sampling in order to analyze any trend, in order to study the behavior of PM10 sourcing during time. Would be interest also add new tracer and different time resolution. I thank you all for the attention. I only add that all data collected are available upon request to scientific community if is interested for other study. In particular, are available for deep the relation between PM10 component and health effect.
Thank you very much. Incredibly interesting. And yeah, looking forward to hearing more about that in the future as well. So yes, handing over to Live Remy for their presentation.
Yep. Thank you for the invitation. I'm Giuseppe Maffeis from Terraria. We are the coordinator of this project. Next slide, please. So REMI means reducing emission modeling uncertainty. So we are a small project with a very focused aim to focus on emission uncertainty. We have 5 partners. We Terraria as coordinator, AMAT and RSA from Italy, XIC from Spain, and IEP from Poland. We have 3 case studies. One in Italy, again, as in Prepare Po Valley, and with a focus on Milan City, on Catalonia in Spain, with a focus on Barcelona, and in southern Poland, with a focus on Krakow. So in these 3 areas, we have performed different emission measurements, and then we have provided different modeling simulation, both with a CTM model and with a source apportionment with both CTM and PMF, and also urban modeling. Next slide, please. So, which is the aim, the principal aim of the project is to provide harmonized recommendation based on REMI's emission and modeling results. So this is very important to be underlined. So where we start from about emission uncertainty, EMEP and AI guidebook tells that accuracy of the emission estimates should be reported, and this is the only suggestion because no methodology is provided. This is the only suggestion on the different uncertainty linked with different emission source categories on the column, and on the left part of this table, and you have pollutants on the right part. So you see that traditional pollutant as SO2 in main sectors as public power has the lowest emission uncertainty, so A, while the new pollutant as ammonia has any uncertainty, so the biggest uncertainty. Next slide, please. So what we have done in REMI, the approach is to focus on emission factors uncertainty, on the activity indicator uncertainty, and also on the pre-processing for modeling, pre-processing of the emission for modeling. So the idea is to focus on the sectors where the uncertainty is the highest, and the emission the same is the highest. So this is a very simple first guess approach, and you have to focus on the weighted sector emission uncertainty. Next slide, please. So what about the first results of the project? You see in the image the different measurements of the resuspension emissions. So first, resuspension contributes significantly to PM levels of course in urban situation, and so it should be considered in the modeling approach. Open waste combustion are not significantly contributing to PM concentration, but they can contribute to toxic or cancerogenic pollutants, so some evaluation should be performed. Then it is very important that for uncertainty and important local emissions, for instance, you see wood oven pizzerias or pellets boilers, should be focused on the bottom-up emission inventory, and some measurement on emission factors are suggested because they are quite different respect literature emission factors. Next slide, please. So Life Remis produce also a web tool for the relocation of IMEP emission inventory on a more detailed scale. You see an image in the slide. This could help to provide a benchmarking to bottom-up emission inventory and give a first rough idea of the uncertainty of the bottom-up emission inventory. Next slide, please. So what about the modeling from the three areas? You see here a comparison between the source apportionment on secondary organic aerosol, and while the measure of PM is quite well modeled, the secondary organic aerosol, the model is not able to correctly reproduce the measurements, and there is an important underestimation of this part of aerosol. Again, road dust resuspension should be included as emission sources. And then both for residential heating distribution, temporal distribution, and for small medium enterprise emission, they should be considered in the bottom-up emission inventory because their sources are quite uncertain. Next slide, please. Finally, this is the contribution of local urban modeling. Again, bottom-up urban emission inventory and local modeling could improve the CTM modeling results, providing peak concentration. And to conclude my intervention, next slide. So first of all, emission inventory is a key issue that should be faced and improved because it could affect the air quality assessment, especially with new pollutants, because as we have seen, they are more uncertainty, mainly in the emission factor. This means that a methodology should be shared, and we think that the emission uncertainty should be reported together with the emission inventory. Remis support will provide at the end of the project next year spring a guideline and a recommendation for this part, and an web emission tool to benchmark the emission inventory. And again, this should be used as a first guess of the uncertainty. Finally, it is important to focus on the most important local emissions, especially when they are uncertainty. And the example are resuspension, biomass burning, and again, for improving modeling, an adequate preprocessing of emission and chemical model should be included. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant. And yes, I think that concludes the first section of our webinar, which is to do with kind of the measurement and a lot to do with modelling of these are the new pollutants covered in the proposed Air Quality Directive. And now we're moving more towards the kind of the crossover with citizen science. You know, how does air quality impact citizens, and what can citizens do to monitor air quality themselves? So yes, passing over to Cities Health to introduce us to these concepts.
Hello. So I'm Xavier Basagaña. I work at the Barcelona Institute for Global Health, and I'm going to very briefly present some of the results of the Cities Health project. Next slide, please. So this is a project that was funded, an Horizon 2020 project that was funded under the Science with and for Society call, which used to be a separate program in Horizon 2020. And our project was a citizen science project that tried to link the urban environment and the health of citizens. We had 6 partners, and we did 5 citizen science studies in different parts of Europe. But in this very brief presentation, I'm only going to present what we did in Barcelona as one of the case studies. Next, please. The idea of the project was that the citizens decided what they wanted to study in relation to the links between air pollution and health. So it was the citizens who decided which specific topic they wanted to study, and then they co-designed together with scientists scientific project and implemented the study. So in Barcelona, citizens were interested in many different health outcomes that could be related to air pollution. But in the end, they decided to focus the study on the link between air pollution and mental and cognitive outcomes, and to investigate the short-term effects linking pollution and mental and cognitive outcomes. So the research question was, do we observe worse mental health outcomes in days with higher air pollution levels? And to do that, we designed a study in which the health outcomes that we measure were the results of an attention test that the participating citizens, there were 300 participants that every day during 2 weeks, they did an attention test on their mobile phone at the end of the day. And also they answered some questions on mood, stress, well-being, and sleep. And then the pollution measurements that we focused mainly on NO2. We used the official monitoring stations in the city, but then we also have the geolocalization of participants, so we knew where they were, and we could link that with hourly maps from models of NO2. And also the citizens were also wearing passive samplers to know their personal exposure. Next. These are the results of the study. In the figure you can see on the left and the different health outcomes that we measured on attention performance. These are objective measures that basically focus on how fast they respond, so the response time and the number of errors that they did in the test. And then the mental health outcomes are self-reported measures on stress, well-being, energy, and sleep quality. So what you see in the figure, well, if it's red, it means that these things worsen with higher pollution. And if it's blue, they improve. And as you can see, most of it is red or reddish. And then the ones that have stars means that the results are statistically significant. So actually, well, the main result of this study was that the short-term variations in air pollution exposure were associated with small alterations in attention, perceived stress, and sleep quality. And the size of these changes when comparing a clean day with a polluted day were about 5% of the variability. If you want to know more about the results of the study, they're published in this paper in Environmental International. Next, please. So, well, this was a very brief description of the study in Barcelona. We did others in other cities, but mainly here some conclusions related to the air quality guidelines. So in our study, citizens were worried about many of the health aspects of health effects of air pollution, although in the end we focused on cognition and mental health. Then the study found short-term effects on cognition on healthy adults, and this was in agreement with previous studies that show that air pollution can affect the brain. Also, the effects that we showed, we found them for concentrations that were mainly below the current air quality standards, but above the WHO air quality guidelines. So we believe that the air quality standards should mainly be driven by the health benefits, and actually these have also associated climate change benefits. So that's my presentation of the Cities Health project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Incredibly interesting. How do you have to compare then to present the progress to date?
Okay, so compare. Next slide, please. Yeah. So compare stands for Community Observation, Measurement and Participation in Air Science. Project runs from the 1st of November 21 and runs until end of next year. Budget of over 5 million euros, and a consortium with 15 partners, 5 pilot areas, which is Berlin, Flanders, Sofia, Plovdiv in Bulgaria, and Athens. Yeah, together we are in fact focusing on air quality measurements and citizen science. Next slide, please. So we believe and compare that citizen science provide more localized and detailed and nuanced insights compared with, let's say, the official high quality, high fidelity measurement stations. But on the other hand, we also see that there are multiple limitations that hinder the transferability of citizen science outputs, in fact, to real life policy and impact change, especially on the local level. So we see, in fact, 3 elements that hinders this transferability potential. First one is trust. How can, let's say, researchers and policymakers work together with the community to increase trust? And you will see in the next slide how this will go. Tools. There is a need of tools for citizen scientists. In many cases, they have limited access to data collections, also to a number of tools, for example, like digital twins, for example. And the third part is participation, how to sustain interest, and especially interest of lower socioeconomic groups is hard to achieve, and those groups are in many cases the most vulnerable ones to bad air quality. Next slide, please. So when we have a look at the tools, we want to empower in the Compare project people with a number of low-cost sensors we have partially developed during the project, and we're rolling them out right now in each of the 5 mentioned pilot sites. The first one on the left-hand side is a low-cost sensor, which is a bit special maybe here in the context today, but we're counting traffic. People can add a device at their windows, and it starts counting pedestrians, cyclists, cars, and lorries. We have, this is the blue box. We have also a mobile PM sensor that for example, children and people can can use on their bikes to mobile, let's say, have mobile information about fine dust particles. We have an NO2 sensor with One Planet sensor from IMEC. And then we also have a low cost sensor, and this is also quite unique. We support, which is measuring black carbon. And then at the bottom of the figure, we also using the sensors from sensor.community and also known from the past as the Luftdaten sensors. So we roll them out all together at one location, in fact, to allow citizens and also local communities to measure together different particles related to also to traffic. And to use that for policy making. So this is the idea how we want to use these sensor tools. Next slide. We also want to enhance the value of sensor data, and we want to create trust by in fact working with a kind of calibration scheme where we combine data from the citizen science sensors with the high fidelity air quality stations around. We want to enhance, by doing that, the use of data by governments, government agencies in their policy making, and especially their local policy making. We want to improve that by, first of all, providing good data and metadata standards so that this kind of citizen science data can be part of official data sets around. We also want to raise the data quality by using expert calibration algorithms and by automated quality assessment. This to enhance the accuracy of IoT sensors. This can be done by comparing the sensors with high fidelity sensors, the IoT sensors from citizen science sensors with the high fidelity sensors directly, or we can do that also by comparing different citizen science sensors closely installed to each other. We also want to broaden the flexibility of the APIs of the different sensors, this to allow a more tailored use for policy making. For example, the traffic counting sensor, there we went from an hourly publication of results to a 15 minutes basis, which allows us to use it, for example, better to measure the effects of implementing school streets, just to give here one example. Next slide. We also want to enhance participation, and there we think that creating and providing open dashboards and tools are very important. So we created open dashboards that allows you to have, as a citizen also, as anyone who is interested, to see the results of the different kind of sensors in a particular project together. We have a CO2 dashboard implemented. And we also have, and this is in the middle of the screen, an AR application where you can see in your city and at your place the results of IoT and other sensors measuring air quality, but also measuring traffic, for example. So by doing this, we also want to provide that information and to make the data more understandable and useful for everyone who's involved in the citizen science project. This can be schools, this can be local communities, and of course, everyone living in the neighborhood. Next slide. And this is also the last slide where I just want to give one proposal towards the new air quality regulation on European level, and it's maybe a little bit different here. What we noticed during the project is when implementing those IoT sensors, citizen science sensors, that it really depends on where you are installing these sensors, the way that they transmit data in an easy way to central servers, and therefore there is a need for narrowband low energy network standards rolled out. These are called LTE-M and NB-IoT. We noticed that, for example, in the capital of Bulgaria, these kind of networks are not available. Also, in some other areas in the European Union, it's very difficult, even at the city level, to have access to this kind of networks. This is not the case, for example, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, north of France, but the farther you go away from Western Europe, the more difficult it becomes. And we believe that it really makes sense to create a level playing field. Also, when we want to measure, for example, rural areas where the rollout of this sensor network that can be done by the mobile GSM networks is not there, but on the other hand, not that difficult to implement. So this is, let's say, what I also want to say and to contribute. And we are also discussing that with European Commission and with the telecom providers to find there a solution in the future, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, incredibly interesting again. And yeah, handing over finally to Rai Evans again to mention more of their kind of citizen science work. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Martien van Poppel. I work for Vito, and I will present you something about what we did in RI Urbans on mapping of new pollutants and citizen science. Yes, next slide, please. I think I can skip this slide because I think Javier already showed you what the project was about, a general overview. So I will focus on what we did in one specific task in the project. Yes, next slide, please. So why would we be interested in urban air quality mapping and having denser data is that we have this fixed reference air quality monitoring stations, which gives very accurate and long time series and accurate results, but they are a bit limited in spatial resolution. And we know that the air quality is not uniform if we look at a city or a region. And in this way, that would give insufficient data about exposure and certain sources. So for health studies, we need some higher density of the spatial and at the same time temporal data. But of course, this needs to be done in a scientific proven way, and the data quality needs to be sufficient. And a good thing would be to involve citizens in to collect this high dense data. Yes, next. So what we will do in task 2.3 is to present a methodology for the mapping of ultrafine particles and other pollutants using mobile platforms and sensor networks with involvement of citizens. Yes, next, please. So how do we address this in the RI Urbans project? So we first summarized the best practices on methods to create these high dense maps. And we developed or we wrote a deliverable on this. And based on this, we selected some methods that were tested or are being tested in the pilots. For this, these were especially the pilots in Rotterdam, Birmingham, and Bucharest. And based on this data, we will collect feedback, and this will be feed into a next deliverable within a few months. And this will then create some recommendations on methodology and added value of this kind of measurements. Next, please. So at the end, this will result in a service tool on mapping outdoor concentrations of ultrafine particles and other pollutants, as Xavier also presented as one of the service tools. Yes, please. So in the deliverable, we tried to come up with some best practices that were known at this moment. And as I said, we made a selection to test in the cases. And we actually distinguish between, okay, you can have mobile measurement, you can have stationary measurement, and you can involve or not involve citizens. And this results in a kind of slightly different approach. I have some examples on this. This is, you can now give the next. So one of the examples is I will talk about later on this mobile measurement by bike. Next is an example on fixed measurements with PM sampling, PM sensors in Athens. Next is on a combined approach, mobile and fixed with citizens. And then the next one is on the mobile measurement without citizens and with more, let's say, reference grade instruments, which is done by University of Utrecht. Yeah. Okay. So the methodology we use here is based on the method we developed at Vito on AirQ, which is called AirQ map, and which consists of mobile measurements of black carbon, and it uses a talometer to measure black carbon and a GPS to define the location. It's a kind of validated approach, and it results in a kind of aggregated black carbon maps. And you can see an example of a cyclist there collecting the instrumentation on this. Next slide, please. So how did we address the Rotterdam case with the citizens? So the volunteers that were involved are employees of the DCMR and the city of Rotterdam. We asked them to measure their daily commuting by bike and focus on peak hours. We communicated with one person at DCMR in Rotterdam who also took care of the instrumentation and the data transfer. And we made an instruction manual for the volunteers, and we made a logbook to collect information during the measurements. As I said, the equipment was talometers and GPS. We had different sets so they could measure at the same time. With five volunteers at the same time. We did a collocation just to be sure that all instruments were within the same, were measuring similar concentrations. And the measurements campaign were performed in the winter from November to March and in summer from May to July. And the individual runs will then result into a winter and a summer map, which we can see on the next slide. So this is a kind of raw data of all the data that were collected. We had respectively 37 and 22 participants, and we made 186 and 130 runs in winter and summer respectively. Some of the runs were only done twice, some of them were repeated up to 22 times, and this learned us on how to interpret and how to further aggregate and use the data and what should be done. This is on the next slide. So what we learned is that we need to do a normalization, as you can see in the figure on top. When some of the parts of the measurements were done, sometimes it resulted in different results and in different concentration, but this was sometimes due to the different in background concentrations. So therefore, and because we were involving citizens doing it in a kind of opportunistic approach, not all data were collected at the same time, resulting in high day-to-day and seasonal variability. So therefore, we developed an approach for the normalization where we used the data from the reference stations in the city, and we applied a kind of absolute normalization using the background station and a relative using the roadside station. I will not go into detail, but these results will learn and will give some recommendation later on also on how to process this data, because this is very important if you want to have good quality maps as a result of this kind of measurements. Next slide, please. So this is then a kind of resulting map, but still for the individual people. I will not go too much into detail here because, yeah, we discussed this also with the people from Rotterdam because they know more specific issues at certain locations. But I think we can have the conclusions now in the next slide. What we learned here is that what we showed here is that the kind of participatory approach with citizens can be valuable to collect a large number of data, but at the same time we also noticed that we need to give them clear instructions and also need to give them feedback on the results to keep them engaged. And also a good quality control and post-processing is needed, like this, for example, this rescaling to derive representative exposure map. We showed the added value, and we observed some clear spatial patterns, like local black carbon contributions was mainly attributed to road traffic during hotspots and rush hour peaks. And also we saw that the bicycle infrastructure can have an effect on the concentrations. So this can lead then into policy can feed into policy for better air quality. So the next step will be data processing, so final aggregation of all the routes, and we will also compare this data with data that were collected by cars, so without citizens. This is work that is still ongoing, and this data can then be used for land use regression model or for model validation. And currently we also doing experiments with additional pollutants like ultrafine particles and PM. So, and also thanks to all the volunteers that participated in this project. Thank you, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for presenting. No, looks like a really interesting study, and also, yeah, great to have people involved from the citizens as well to collect that data. We have, I think, maybe 5 minutes for some questions, and I've seen some popping up in the chat. So I think hopefully we can take one or two. Just having a quick skim, maybe Simonetta's question could be interesting to put to the floor. I don't know whether you wanted to voice that question yourself, or otherwise I'm happy to read it out.
Yeah, we can start reading that from the beginning.
Sure. Well, I haven't heard Simonetta speak yet, but also maybe I can read it out loud for everyone's benefit. But so it says that the use of bioindicators can be useful to strengthen the proposed models. Or sorry, that was a question. So can the use of bioindicators be useful to strengthen the models since they provide wider data resolution, also in citizen science? So I guess it could be a crossover between some of the different presentations we've heard today. Do you have a response to that, Xenia?
Yeah, I think it's very relevant, but the problem is that we need to harmonize the methods. For example, for oxidative potential, that is like a tracer of the potential for the inflammation effect. With this, there are different protocols to measure that. And at this stage, there is not one that has been demonstrated that can be the one to be implemented. So I think that's the reason why the European directive, if I am not wrong, it did not include this as mandatory, but recommended. So as Lucia Bernal showed, we need to have a solid and widely accepted method when it is introduced in the directive, because we need a reference method to measure. Okay, and I think the DG Environment opened a very nice pathway in every evaluation. If there are bioindicators that can be very useful, and then in this Article 10, it can be suggested. But my opinion is that these have to be filtered by WHO. So what DG Environment is doing, in my opinion, I think, is that the WHO is recommending to implement measures or alert systems for the African dust, to have new measurements for ultrafine particles, to have new measurements for oxidative potential from black carbon. And then DG Environment is following the indications from WHO, because there is a very intensive and very wide scientific debate on the parameters to be selected.
Can I answer?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Okay. Just a quick question. Thank you to Professor Querol. A few months ago, we founded an association, the International Association on Biomonitoring of Environmental Pollution, just 2 months ago. IBIP is the name. And this association gathers many scientists very skilled in biomonitoring. One of our goals would be to interact with European Union, just to select what Professor Querel was saying, the most suitable method that could be integrated in modeling of pollution. Because the advantage of biomonitoring is that we have a lot of data spread on the environment that could be integrated in a model. So if somebody is interested, I can leave our contact for future interaction. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. This seems very interesting to have a discussion inside a urban list. Thank you.
We can facilitate those connections. So yeah, we'll blast through your contact details if you would like. Unfortunately, I would love to take more questions, and it seems like there's one that has some reactions in the chat, which is to do with some problems with citizen science and kind of accuracy of data. I think we might need to carry that on offline, I'm afraid, because we need to wrap up this session. But yeah, hopefully, if anyone wants to respond to that within this chat or afterwards through us, then yes, we can do that following this. But yeah, just to summarize this session, I'd like to thank everyone for attending, first of all, and also especially to the speakers in preparing their presentations. I thought they were all really engaging. They were all approachable people that weren't familiar with the topic. And I hope we achieved a few of our goals, which was, first of all, to let projects kind of know between each other what they're working on and what the recent results have been. Secondly, to make sure that the results coming from projects are being fed to policymakers. So it's great that we have Roman here from the World Health Organization, and also some the DG Environment will be looking at these presentations. And also, I hope anyone here that is more kind of just interested in air quality, just from a day-to-day point of view, might have learned how they can monitor their air quality in their area, and maybe how to get involved in feeding some of that data into these research projects and also policy making. So I hope we all learned something today, and I'm sure there will be many discussions following this in the near future. So yeah, if you would like to contact us with any questions, get in contact with the projects, you can use that email address at the bottom of the slide there, support@greendealprojects.eu. And finally, I'd also like to really request that everyone just let us know how they thought this webinar went, whether they found it interesting. There's a feedback survey at the link there. And yes, just to confirm, there's been a few questions that we will be sharing these slides with everyone that registered to this webinar. So you will receive the slides. There will be links to the reports the project's been working on, and especially the feedback survey. And we'd really like to hear what you thought about how it went. So if there's no other comments or questions, I think I'll probably draw this to a close. So again, thank you to everyone who presented, and also a big shout out to a colleague within the Green Deal Support Office called Yael Morez, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, but she was instrumental in organising this, as well as a few other colleagues in the support office. So yes, many thanks, and look forward to speaking in future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
A lot.